Welcome back to Star or Shovelware, my name's Luke, and today on the channel we're going to be taking a look at Company Man on the Nintendo Switch, and this one is an action platformer where you play as a down on his luck salaryman called Jim, who after finding himself on the lowest rung of the corporate ladder has to fight his way back up through the ranks, attempting to fulfill his lifelong quest to become a CEO, but at what cost, and is it worth it? And by this I mean the game itself. Well, hit that like button, subscribe for more Switch reviews and content, and let's find out. So the story in Company Man follows the fall and rise of Company Man Jim, who after accidentally breaking some machinery during his first day on the job, immediately finds himself demoted and forced to work in the customer service department. Furious at being duped by fellow co-worker William, Jim then proceeds to fight his way through customer services, defeating its hulking manager in a one-on-one battle of brains versus brawn, after which he is then promoted to human resources, and thus ensues Jim's climb to the top of the corporate ladder. Now I've embellished the storyline a little with this introduction, as there's not actually a lot in terms of straight up dialogue or storytelling. However, the whole game is a bit of a metaphor for corporate greed, and how a simple salaryman can find himself caught up in some not so savoury dealings if his quest for greatness gets the better of him. There is some great imagery in the game though, with each level featuring uniquely different environments and enemies, all of which are representative of different corporate business domains, such as the piles of gold and frozen assets of the accounting sector, or the beautiful image-centric region of marketing. And while most of the game's story is told via this imagery, there are a couple of points at which we get a peek into the backstory of Jim and the reasons why he's so driven to reach the top. And overall, I thought the devs did a decent job of telling the game's story while maintaining focus on the gameplay. So at its core, Company Man is pretty much your typical classic action platformer, and it keeps things simple in terms of its basic gameplay mechanics, with you able to jump and perform a dash maneuver to deal with the platforming segments and avoid enemy attacks, while your own attacks consist of melee strikes using your keyboard, and ranged attacks which take the form of different types of emails. As you work your way through the game, you'll obtain new types of ranged attacks, from standard singular emails to blasts of reply alls and streams of spam emails, and each of these has their own damage, range and energy cost and are useful in different situations, but I usually just stuck to using the most powerful email at my disposal. Now, as I said in the story section, each of the game's levels take the form of some element of the corporate business chain, so these include things like customer services, human resources, accounting and marketing, and the objective in each of these levels is to simply work your way through them, fighting and firing co-workers, until you reach the level's boss, whom you must then defeat in order to proceed to the next level. Enemies in the game are all themed around the levels you find them in, so you'll find things like fire-breathing customer service representatives, icy accountants and crazed artists in the marketing department, and there's some really good variety to the enemies, with each of them having their own attacks and methods to defeating them. When it comes to the game's bosses, they're all uniquely different and represent a comical manifestation of the areas in which they work, and the battles with these bosses were all pretty well designed. However, I did find the difficulty levels to be a little inconsistent from one boss to the next. In general, I found the game's combat to be reasonably well done, and the game strikes a decent balance between its combating and platforming elements. However, as I got further into the game, I did just find myself running past most of the enemies. Both enemies and bosses reward you with coins, which can then be used to purchase a few different upgrades, such as additional health and energy bars or faster energy recovery, but after purchasing a couple of key upgrades, one of which granted life recovery after killing an enemy, I found that I really didn't need any more of them, and so stopping to fight enemies or seek out each level's hidden coin stashes just seemed like a bit of a waste of time. Now onto the topic of level design, I felt that the developers did a good job of keeping things interesting by implementing unique features into each level, each of which also matched the level's theme. These included things like deadly shredder blades in the HR department, pools of dodgy liquid in R&D, and TVs which act as teleporters in the marketing department, and I liked how there were some minor puzzle solving elements to some of these features, like having to redistribute the weight on scales in the accounting levels in order to progress onwards. At times the game's platforming sections could be quite tricky with some precise timing required to make certain jumps, but in general both the platforming and combat were reasonably easy, and the only real frustrations I had were when it came to the game's boss battles. Now there's not a whole lot more to say in terms of the gameplay with this one. Overall, Company Man is just a well-made platformer with some interesting enemies and platforming mechanics, and while it does keep things relatively simple and you won't find anything particularly unique with this one, it still offers a solid and enjoyable platformer experience, and I also thought it had a decent amount of content to offer, with the game having a total of 7 levels, each taking around 20 minutes to complete, providing you don't just sprint through them like I did. So for me, the visuals in Company Man were a real standout point, and I really like the hand-drawn cartoon-like art style they went for with this one, and it's got some great animations. I thought the concept of having each level themed around a different business department was a really creative way of making each level unique and having a theme which ties really well into the plotline of the game, and I loved the attention to detail given to both the environments and enemy designs, which really helped to add an element of humour to the game by playing on the clichés of the business world. Now on the audio side of things, we get some decent sound effects and ambience to the game's environments, though I did find that the jump sound effect was a little loud and did get a little irritating. The game also had a decent soundtrack to it, with some enjoyable tunes to play along to, most of which had a bit of a quirky jazz or funk edge to them, and overall I thought they did a really good job with the audio and visual design in this one. Now with regards to the game's performance on the Switch, I didn't really notice any real frame rate drops throughout my time playing, and it appeared to maintain a solid frame rate even when the action got a little bit more hectic. I've already spoken about my issue with the game's combat becoming somewhat insignificant after obtaining a few key character upgrades, but there is one other minor criticism I have about the game which concerns its dodge mechanic. Now I found that the dodge was primarily used to perform longer jumps during the platforming sections rather than in combat, because although it can be used to dash over the top of enemies, it doesn't actually provide any iframes, so trying to dodge through enemies or their attacks will just result in you taking damage, and so it's really just pretty useless as a defensive manoeuvre. There are also in fact a few enemies in the game that don't deal damage to you when you come into contact with them, which is just a small element of inconsistency, but other than these things I don't really have anything else to report in terms of issues, and the game is generally pretty solid. I would say that they could have maybe got a little bit more ambitious with the platforming sections and added a little extra challenge to it, but its mild difficulty makes it accessible, and sometimes it's just nice to play a platformer that doesn't make you rage. When it comes to my own personal rating of the game, I'm going to be giving Company Man 4 out of 5 stars. If you're looking for an entertaining little platformer with some relatively simple but enjoyable gameplay and an average level of difficulty, then Company Man should suit you nicely. And so that about does it for this review of Company Man on the Nintendo Switch. So are you going to be picking it up? Or if you already have, how did you find it? Let me know down in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit that like button if this review helped you out, and if you watch my content regularly and are not yet subscribed, then please consider doing so. For now though, as always, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.